Hello and welcome to the Women of Ambition podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Calder-Hume, and today I'm starting a new season, and I'm finally going to attempt to sit down and explain the research that I've been doing. And it's kind of hard for me because I've been in this world of being back in school and actually looking at data and research and things, and I'm sure I'm going to explain it imperfectly. But I feel like it's important to kind of take you along with me on this journey of understanding ambition and why so many of us feel the way we do in terms of feeling like we don't fit in or there's not a space for us. So as I've kind of hinted previously on the podcast, I have returned to school. I'm going to the University of Utah. I'm completing my gender studies graduate certificate this spring. I will have completed that. And in addition to that, I've also taken some sociology courses to try and make sure that I really want to go and pursue my doctoral degree in sociology, which has been a wonderful experience. That's what I'm doing now. I just finished applications for all of that last month. And that all going back to school applications has accounted for some of the spaciness of this podcast recently. And so I just wanted to call that out and just say, yeah, I'm back in school full time. It's a very busy schedule. I'm still committed to keeping this podcast up. It's just going to be kind of irregular, and the length of time that I spend with each episode might really vary. So now that I'm kind of on this side of my research and this side of my education, I wanted to share what I found because it's been super validating to my experience and explains a lot of the experiences of the other guests on the show. So my choice to return to school was kind of an experiment. I've been doing, in my bachelor's degree is in literature. And really I chose that because I love to observe human behavior, and then also analyzing authors and how they write about human behavior is really revealing to their goals, their values, and their perspectives. And so I really enjoyed analyzing that and then creating my own as a writer, using journalism and podcasting to kind of comment on society and observe and speak to the trends that I see. But in that time, if you've been a longtime listener and you've heard this, it's been frustrating to me to not know how to make an impact, to make a difference, and to go beyond just observing and commenting, which is a very important role. We absolutely need our journalists and our authors and, all kinds of people to make social observations and speak to them. But I really wanted something that was a little more concrete, a little more impactful. And it's interesting now that I have the podcast where I've been sharing this journey, because this process of sharing stories and experiences actually is a way of doing feminist sociology, where we allow women to speak about their own stories and then we theorize about them and kind of explain them. So I am pursuing a degree in sociology. I'm finishing my gender studies, and I'm going to kind of share with you my process for the research I'm doing, how it intersects with the podcast, and how it's helped me personally. So in my sociology classes, I learned about Robert Merton's string theory. And this is a sociological framework that describes one of the elements is deviance. And when we think of someone who is a deviant, we think, okay, somebody in the criminal detention center, someone going to jail, someone, it's kind of a creepy word to me. Like, the connotation is very scary and dark and like someone's intentionally hurting me. But when I was studying this theory, what I realized is that deviance isn't inherently bad. It's just a difference of values and a difference of doing things. And it can harm other people around us, and it can also not. But the experience of being othered, of being viewed as deviant, even if that language is not used, is very universal to a lot of people. And so what I saw in just learning about this general theory, it was a theory class, had nothing to do with gender or ambition or anything like that. But what I saw was that in crossing over into expressing myself as an ambitious woman, that society as a group was seeing me as deviant, and that as being seen as this deviant other, it is built into our society to perpetuate itself. So anybody who crosses a boundary that threatens the functionality of society or the order or whatever it is, society as a whole is set up to see that as a red flag. Okay, something's changing. We want to keep it the same. Let's take care of this. And so in crossing maybe traditional gender roles or ways of talking or words that I use to identify myself, it triggers fear in other people, and it triggers policing, and it triggers a lot of the shame, the aspirational shame that we've talked about on the show thus far. And so in my schooling, I had to write papers and do all kinds of things to engage in this sociology work. And in that process, I started to just research what has been learned about ambition in the field of sociology and to look at those studies in depth. And what I found was really interesting. Despite knowing in the 1950s that women and men express ambition differently, and whether that's nature or nurture, I'm not even going to touch that right now. Personally, I think a lot of it is socialization. And so because if you're in the United States, if you're a woman, you're gonna have dealt with some of this socialization, and that is the common thread that I'm finding in the research. But okay, so in crossing those boundaries, we're getting policed. And then research has not looked at women's ambition closely enough. And so I'm going to kind of show how that came to be. In my research, I came across Alice Eagly, who is a fantastic scholar, and she has created something called social role theory. And this theory is fairly new. Alice Eagly's most recent publications are from 2022, at least that I've found thus far. We're just in the first month of 2023, so hopefully there's lots more to come. But this is a new way of looking at gender roles and where they come from and why there are such similarities across the world in so many different cultures. And there are lots of cultures that are not patriarchal. Ours is patriarchal in the United States. A lot of Western capitalist cultures are that way, but there are certain threads that are similar. And so her analysis is trying to explain this, and I'm interested in finding out if that holds water in many different spaces. So I'm using it as a framework to do my own study. But there are these two kind of buckets that she describes for gender roles. And so men are traditionally associated with agentic gender roles. And so those are spaces where men are encouraged to be aggressive, assertive, outward-facing, achievement-oriented, very much in like socioeconomic status, your title, your job. They're very outward-facing status markers, and men are encouraged to achieve and to act and to do outside of the home in the public space. And so women are typically expected to inhabit communal spaces. And so those are socially oriented spaces, family oriented spaces, selflessness, sacrificing. We are not encouraged to achieve or to have dreams in that same way. And so I use this framework of agentic and communal. And I know that agentic is kind of a weird word, but think of it in terms of agency. Men are expected to act and to be able to act in the community, in the world, in their job, and it's fine. And then when a woman does that, it's weird. And it's like, why is it weird for a woman to be ambitious? Why is there like a stigma around that? And every single person I've talked to has talked about the stigma of ambition. And I've been in contact with people from all over the world, from all different countries, and everyone talks about the stigma of ambition. And it's not always framed in the exact same way, especially for men, but really for women, it's really not okay to express ambition. And so I think that is like such an interesting thread, and I haven't been able to research that fully, but that is kind of my next step, is to see if the experiences of the women on this podcast not only are a common experience of other women, because I've been told for a lot of my life that it's just me, not even just the United States, but the worldwide, and why would that be? So using this agentic and communal framework, I went and analyzed past research in sociology. And I'm getting ahead of myself here in my notes. Okay, so I'm going to pause that for just a second. When we break from those agentic and communal spaces, there's pushback. We've talked a lot about not being accepted, spousal pushback, parents, religion, even within businesses and companies, to want to grow and to be ambitious. There is policing around that. And so when we experience that pushback, that is the deviance from deviating from the social roles that we have been expected to live within. And when we experience that othering and that pushback, we feel crappy in various different ways. It can be like a really small, like microaggression, or it could be a lot bigger, like someone is, trying to prevent you from being in a religion or getting a job or, leaving your home physically because you want something that is different. And when we experience the results of that sadness, that's called anomie. And that is another one of those big sociological terms that means like a sadness and an alienation and othering that is really icky. And it's really hard to even articulate it when we're feeling it, because the whole point of othering is to make people feel like it is just them. And I will tell you that the experience of anomie and of being othered is actually the universal experience of a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, mostly because we're not all white men in the United States. And so any deviating from that, like prime, man prime, if you know Sylvia Winters, I think you know what I'm talking about, where like the default is a white man in the society. And so anything that is other from that is going to be othered. And with women, it's a little bit different because obviously I'm white, I have white privilege associated with that, but there is like this ascribed role. And so for, even as an example, for a lot of history, women were not even considered sexual, we were considered asexual. And so the idea of like lesbians was like not something that was even on the radar of a lot of men, because they thought that women were just like receivers and receptacles, that we didn't actually have any of our own sexual drive or needs or like whatever. And clearly that's not true, but that's another way that women have been made invisible. So this experience of anomie is felt in all kinds of ways. If you're queer, if you're not white, if you are living in a society that is different than yours, you're going to feel othered. And so what was really validating in this experience was to finally have language to describe what I was going through, but also every other woman on this podcast, all the women that message me, people on Instagram that I interact with, who I'm so grateful for, by the way. I love that community. Thank you for being there. But having this language to describe the phenomena of being othered and being told over and over again, it's just me. I remember talking with a man in my family who at the time I really respected and admired, and I was explaining some of the frustrations I have as being a woman in our society. And the feedback was, oh, I really hope that you can learn to express yourself in a better way so that you're accepted. And I remember at the time being like, what? No, that's not what I was trying to express to you. Like, I am my own person. I get to show up as I am. I just want the space to show up as I am. I want to be taken seriously because I'm a person, not because I have to say it in a certain way. And so that's just like one micro experience where it's not the structure that is problematic. It's not society. It's actually you, and there's no one else that it experiences this. It's just a you problem, which is total crap. But it's a really effective way to keep people from unifying, like starting a podcast and finding out, oh, I'm not the only one. It's a really effective way to do that. And not everyone who is, enacting that controlling policing behavior is fully aware of that, because they've been socialized, especially as men. Men have been socialized to do this. Women, we do this to each other all the time. Women against women, misogyny happens all the time. Misogyny does not mean that you have to be a man to have it. It just means you want to control other women, or you think women are less than men. And so we do this to each other. We have a structure that is set up to perpetuate this idea. And if we can separate women from each other and we don't realize we're having a universal experience of being oppressed, then it's really hard to try and do anything about it, or even to study it or to analyze it. And so that's why I've been really appreciative of the podcast, because we've been able to come together. And for me, starting like 2 or 3 years ago, to realize, wow, I'm not the only person who is receiving this very weird, sometimes overt, sometimes very subtle response to just like showing up as who I am. And so I want to share this Bell Hooks quote that is so fantastic. So for those who don't know, Bell Hooks that was a lowercase b and a lowercase h on purpose in how she spelled her pen name, was an American author and social activist who's also a professor and studied race, feminism, class, lots and lots of topics. And so this is a quote from her piece, Theory as Liberatory Practice. And I know this is very academic focused, but I think it's important to share it because Bell Hooks is not just speaking to academics, she's speaking to women all across the world, specifically to women of color, and describing how we all theorize in our own way, and it doesn't have to be done in an academic sense to be valid. And I'm going to share one paragraph and then later another one that really describes what we're doing on this podcast and what a lot of women have experienced here in just listening. So she says, I came to theory because I was hurting, and the pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away. I saw in the theory then a location for healing. I'm getting a little emotional because that has been my experience. Feeling othered, feeling hurt, feeling repressed, and feeling like I was the only one. And then having just the idea, what if I'm not the only one? What if I'm not the problem? What if there is actually space and a way for me to be who I am? What if other people feel this way? What if there was a way to change it? And that theory, that questioning, that verbalizing of a paradigm that I was experiencing, and the help of all of my guests along the way to articulate that and to share that in all the many ways that it has manifested in their lives, has been really, really validating to me. And I know a lot of you who've been listening. So thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your stories, whether you do it personally through messages to me, or you're willing to be a guest, or you share it on your own page or whatever. Our ability to theorize about our own life and come together is liberating. So back to my research. We've talked about ambition as being a personality trait, a psychological trait. And also how it is also a socialized thing that happens. So we know that we can be born with ambition. We can have personalities that are more ambitious or less ambitious. Again, like, not being ambitious is not a bad thing in my book. It is neutral. It is absolutely neutral. It should be absolutely neutral. We don't need to be like this. This podcast is for women who are oriented that way, or want to explore their ambition, or want to understand other people who are expressing it. So I just want to, again, say that, like, I don't expect all women to be like this. I'm just trying to understand my experience and the experiences of other women. So we can be born ambitious, which I think a lot of us are who are here, but it can also be socialized out of us, or it can be socialized to grow. It can be nurtured, or it can be stunted. And we've seen that in some of the studies I've shared about workplace, and how women who are in toxic work environments appear to have no ambition or less ambition. But when they are properly nurtured and supported, their ambitions are equal to men. And so we know that we have power as a society to nurture or to kill ambition. And that can be in church, it can be in the workforce, it can be at school, it can be in family, it can be in any of our relationships with each other. And for me, this is a side of myself that I can't ignore, or I will start dying inside, as I have. And so I need to nurture it in order to be fully myself. And so that's kind of what is intriguing me the most at this point, the socialization side of ambition. What can I do to make it better for my children? What can I do to make it better for other people? And so in that zone of socialization, when we cross those gender roles and we feel the enemy, we feel the strain, we feel the isolation, it's really validating to hear that experiences from other people. And I'm going to read one more Bell Hooks quote that is at the end of that same paper that she wrote. But it's about coming together, especially as women, and sharing our stories. She says, our search leads us back to where it all began, to that moment when an individual woman or child who may have thought she was all alone began a feminist uprising, began to name her practice, indeed began to formulate theory from lived experience. I'm getting emotional again because I remember that crystallizing moment where I'm feeling shame for this. I don't want, like, that's not okay. And then realizing, thinking, am I the only one? And asking people around me in my community, have you experienced this? Or I'm experiencing this, what do you think? And being told, no, that's just you. Or no, it's just your conservative people you live with. Or no, that's just your family of origin. Or that's just your religion. Or that's just the United States. Or whatever it was. It was really dismissive and really inaccurate based on the research I've done. This isn't just something that I experience or that I could somehow magically opt out of by changing my circumstances or my environment. So the power of knowing we're not the only ones experiencing this allows us to then theorize together and to start changing things. So my goal is to figure out how best to work to change society so that there is space for more fluid individuals who cross those gender roles, whether it's ambition or whether it's something else. If a man wants to be non-ambitious, like, that is equally important to me. But we're really hurting a very large segment of the population with how strictly we are guarding these gender roles and how we punish them. And it's not okay to tell people that they need to change to fit in the structure, especially when the structure is hurting them. We need to look at the larger structure. And if we're not even willing to look at the bigger system that doesn't have space for, like, my tiny version of deviating, like, I am a mother of 4 children, okay? Like, I'm very much a typically expected woman in many, many ways. I just also have dreams and goals and things that I want. Like, I need to be able to have space in society to express that way. And every version of that for every other human needs to exist. So when I've been looking at the sociological research, the past research starting in the 1950s shows that men and women manifest ambition differently, like I said earlier. But starting from that point on, that's really the last time that women's ambition was looked at very closely. There have been some recent studies that I will share at some point that have looked at women and ambition. I mean, we're talking like last year, like published in like October and November of 2022, like very recently. But a vast majority of the sociological research has looked at ambition either as not even including women or as including them, but looking at metrics and measurements of ambition and indicators of ambition that are very, very focused on agentic roles. So that's like socioeconomic status, job title, class, how big your house is, if you achieved your goals after high school. And it's been really, really limiting, and it's made that women are not represented in that data, and that our understanding of ambition is really, really gendered. And so the paper I just wrote and I'm getting published right now was about the gender data gap in past sociological research. And it's what I'm going to build off on to then argue for a recontextualization of that research. I don't think it's all crap, but I do think we need to look at who's represented and who's not. And my analysis so far has seen agentic roles being exclusively analyzed. Women may or may not even be included in that pool, but our complex socialization is not taken into account. Women generally have many, many more responsibilities than just their job. And so our ambition, as we've seen on this podcast, manifests very, very differently than a man whose maybe singular role is to provide for his family and have a job. And so that's where I want to go with this. Because we're being ignored, we're not being lumped in, we're being underserved as a community. And from a sociological perspective, society needs to serve the needs of the people. And it's not always going to be perfect for everybody. That would be utopia. But what I'm seeing is a structural order that is hurting women, people of color, queer people, anybody who deviates from the norm, and pushes them to feel alone and to feel othered. And that's why we're seeing rising rates of suicide. That's why we're seeing all kinds of really horrific trauma that people are experiencing and then have to overcome. And just people feeling like they don't fit in society. And so I would like to change something. I don't know exactly how, but we need to change something to just make more space for people to be who they are. And then language and support and recognition for people who feel isolated. I didn't have anyone telling me, hey, you're not the only one. Everyone is saying the exact opposite. I had to go and take the work of doing and finding out that there was an alternate storyline, an alternate truth out there that other people were experiencing, seek out people who could understand where I was coming from, to even begin to have the language to look at the larger structural issues. And so that's kind of where I want to go. I could go into a lot of the studies, and I probably will in another episode, that have shown how women hide their ambition when they're around men because they don't want to be perceived as more ambitious. I could talk about the dating oriented studies out there that have looked at men's perception of women and women's perception of men, and how ambition is positive for men. And it's okay if a woman's ambition is less than a guy, generally speaking, but as soon as, in these date matchup setups, a man perceives a woman's ambition to be equal or above his, she is completely unattractive. It's really fascinating. It's really revealing. And so even within the data that is looking at attraction or business and like socioeconomic status, like we can do more there. But I also want to look at women's ambition as something that is much more complex when we look at family, quality of life for children, for all the many, many tasks that we manage, how ambition can be a stretch beyond our circumstances or beyond what is expected of us. It doesn't actually have to mean that I am a CEO of a company and it's this white collar job. Like there are many other ways that we can stretch and grow and want something more and be achievement oriented that don't look typical. And so in hopefully studying that, I have a whole research proposal set up that I want to do for this, because I want to study the socialization of ambition, but then also other ways to look at it in terms of stretch. A stretch factor is kind of my term that I'm coining to research this. But then be able to expand it to other people that are not the typical white male Americans. Sociology is a American-born practice. It is wonderful. It's relatively new, but it's done in English language. It's founded in America. We have a lot of schools for sociology, and there are more worldwide now, but it's very US culture based. And so that means that there are a lot of blind spots that we can look at and we can do better at. And so starting with kind of this historical look at how ambition has been studied from a structural perspective is really revealing. Who's doing the research? Where are they coming up with their definitions? Ambition as a term is not defined. It's all relative, and the researchers are looking at particular aspects. And again, so I don't feel like I'm a scientist yet, but I'm like trying to learn how to become one, and I don't know at what point I will be, but I'm like Miss Literature, reading books, analyzing texts person. But as a scientist, we have the scientific method that talks about how to come up with an answer to a scientific question. And it is very, it's based in a history of science that is it's called positivism. And that means that A plus B equals C every time. And it's very, very linear, it's very clear. And there's a lot of things that just really don't function that way. But so when we look at the scientific method, it's kind of founded on this like A plus B equals C method. And that's its own thing. It's its own issue that's being looked at right now, especially in feminist methodologies. But when we are looking at what we do in science, what questions we ask, and what parameters we pursue, like we're really revealing our own bias, the own research that we've done, our own privilege, and there really is no check and balance for what questions are asked. Mom, it's time. Okay, I'll be there in 2 minutes. That's my 3-year-old, and I'm keeping that in because this is real life. There's really no way of critiquing the questions that people are asking, and those questions are going to determine the knowledge that is gathered. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at. That's kind of what I'm analyzing and trying to figure out what better questions can we ask to serve a population that is underserved, to support half of society, just barely under half of society that really needs more support and more space. So that's where I'm coming from right now. I know it was a really fast rundown of a lot of big terms. We'll go into it more as time goes on. but I've really been holding back from sharing all of this stuff because like I'm not done learning about it yet, and I'm never going to be. And so this is my effort to just kind of share with you along the way. I do talk a lot about this on my Instagram, stories and reels and things like that. They're just more casual. They're just, when I'm thinking about it, I'll pop something on and like share what I'm learning and how it applies to real life. And I'm going to try and bring that to the podcast, but just the way life is right now, being a mother, being in school full time, figuring out where I'm going to be next year it's a lot. So pop on there if you want kind of more everyday examples of this. I can't unsee it now. Now that I know what agentic roles are and communal roles are, I can't unsee it. There was a paper that I read about public education in the 1970s and 80s, trying to help teenagers grow into good citizens. And it was very problematic use of disabled teens to show examples of overcoming, which the paper dealt with. But the two examples I'm thinking of are two people in the same episode of one of these public access shows who had disabilities. And the boy was rewarded for overcoming his disability and being able to earn money. And I think he like ran a race and won it. And that was his big cathartic moment where everyone else in the show was like happy for him and he had achieved recovery and overcoming. Whereas the girl was trying to do that for the whole episode, and the people kept telling her, you just need to accept where you are. You're never gonna be able to be, I think she was an ice skater again, like you're never gonna be able to do that. And she wasn't given acceptance and support, and the storyline didn't change for her until she accepted that she will never be in the spotlight again, but she can help other people and teach other people and mentor other people. And that again is that example of a communal role where you are oriented to other people, which is not bad. It's not bad. But it's an example of socialization that was intentionally given to teens to show them who they should become in the future. And what is being a good citizen? What is their role? What is their place? Women are supposed to let go of their dreams. It's selfish to have dreams. And it's, you're just going to hurt yourself more. Instead, you should give that up and serve other people who have dreams and help them achieve. Whereas men, boys, are socialized to be told that they need to overcome and achieve and get to that role of getting awards, getting accolades, getting public recognition, and getting money for what they're doing to be where they should be as a good citizen. And now my mind is like filled with like 1,000 examples of this because I can't unsee it. So now I can't unsee it because it's everywhere. So I will be sharing examples of that on the podcast, and I'll also be sharing examples of that on Instagram as they come up. So hopefully that is a good rundown. Thank you for being with me on this episode of the Women of Ambition podcast. Please go on Instagram and interact with me there. It's a lot more casual, a lot more exciting stuff. I share things all the time on this topic and a lot of resources and things. But that is going to be the end for today. Thank you for being with me in this kind of new format and more random publication. It's just going to be how we roll right now. We're just going to go with it. So thank you so much and have a very good day.